as somebody for years now who has been defamed publicly, and people say, "Why don't you sue the people to defame?" Because it's actually a lot more complicated than that, and it's not black and white. And sometimes when they drag your name through the mud, they can use certain truths and twist it to fit the narrative, and it's not necessarily suable, but it's dishonest. And in this case, so the elephant in the room is are the Yeminis a woman basher? I get those comments all the time. Well, another spoiler alert from the book. I've never in my life hit a woman, let alone my ex-wife.
So what is the truth behind that then? Because that is brought up on social media a lot. Obviously, there is a real genuine conviction there. So what is your side of the story? And obviously, we'd love to talk to your ex-wife and get her side as well, because every interaction with anybody has two sides to a story. But what is your version of events, and how did that play out?
So for me, look, it's very simple. I talk about it in the book. Now, there are still certain limitations in Australian law about what you can say. But let me put it to you this way. I was already in a new relationship. I'd been broken up for about 18 months. It was amicable. And when I started a new relationship, so my first relationship was very toxic. I was very young, 21, got married, had kids straight away. It was, and my whole life story until that point was chaotic. I'm the first of 17, I'm the 10th of 17 children. I was on drugs, ended up on the streets, went to the Israeli army, came back to this toxic relationship, and I was married for about 10 years. The point is, when we broke up, it was amicable enough. I had the kids half the time. Then when I got into a new relationship, which is my current wife, which is a completely different story. I'm older, I know myself a lot better, and I know what I expect from a relationship and what I want to give and get from a relationship. But, when I started a new relationship, things turned really, I call it the toxicity of my marriage turned into the Chernobyl of my divorce. And without, obviously, with what I can tell you, this is essentially the option I was given at this point, is I could plead guilty to a summary offense for a crime I hadn't committed and basically have my kids. Or I could fight to clear my name and not see my kids for almost whatever it takes, a couple of years. And to me, and I think to any good parent, it's not really an option. And I would go back in time and do it again. As much as painful as it has been to be labeled those horrible things, it's still not a hard decision. I would, as any good parent would, I think you would just jump to go, yep, my pride over your kids. I'll take my kids every single time, and I would do it again. But this is the first time I'm able to talk about it, and I do go into it a bit more in my book, and I give you a bit of a broader picture of it. But no, it is a complete lie. But it's one that I've had to live with, and not be able to talk about for until now. So I'm excited to be able to just say those words. No, I've never hit a woman in my life, let alone my ex-wife. And I hate women bashers. And if you're a woman basher, you're a horrible person. But I really, really finally understand so many men, what they go through in relationship breakdowns. And in my scenario, it's something that I wouldn't have believed. In fact, I'm going to talk about it tonight in a podcast with Sydney Watson, because she was she was a big campaigner on these issues back when, I'm not sure if you know, she's a great commentator from Australia, Australian American. And, we've been friends for a bunch of years. And there was a men's rights rally that I can't remember what it was called. She ran, it was a huge success, right? And this was before any of my experience. And I remember, like, I was good friends with her. She asked me to help her with these projects because she never had any experience with doing those things. And I was working with this Australian Liberty Alliance. I had a bit of, know-how and experience on it. And I remember turning to her at the time going, like, I don't really feel strongly about this issue, like, whatever, like, it's not my thing, but I'll help you. And in my head, I was thinking, like, men's rights, like, if there's smoke, there's fire. These men are probably all abusive, whatever. And I remember at the time what actually really stood out to me was I think she announced it on like a Wednesday for the Saturday, and it was the biggest conservative protests, because back then, it was prior to COVID and that, conservatives would not take to the streets. And I couldn't believe how many people came to this protest. It blew up. I was like, wow. And now fast forward to everything I've been through since that time and my experience going through the system, I'm like, I understand why. And I also understand why the male suicide rate would be so high. There was a day that I talk about in the book, but we call it, me and my wife call it the day we don't talk about. And that was the day after I was, charged for these bogus offenses. Like, I was on the floor crying and I thought it was the end of my life. I was just lucky that I had the right support around me. And it was something that I couldn't even talk about. It was the worst experience of my life. But I guess, that old cliche, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think into the future, I want to be a voice for so many men that go through this. And I don't know, only think there are also a lot of good women that see it and stand against it. And in society, it's like the pendulum swung all the way the other way, where um, like again, I think that the suicide rate in Australia, at least, and I imagine in New Zealand might be something similar, but in Australia, it reflects this issue that men seem to have suddenly no rights, and there's a certain there's kind of a formula that's used to really against men when they have a relationship breakdown that removes all the power from them, and then you end up with situations like mine. The thing with mine is it was played out a lot more public.
Yeah.
And it is a bit bizarre. You're calling me this woman basher, and you've got this weird story of me allegedly throwing a chopping board at. It's not even what I'd pled guilty to, by the way, is not that I threw a chopping board at my ex-wife. It was that I threw a chopping board that hit her. All right. And in truth, it was a very non-event. It was that I slammed a chopping board on the bench in a heated moment of an argument. Now, like, I'm not going to get into my ex-wife, and to be honest, I don't think it's anyone's really business.
Yeah, and especially if she's not here to kind of defend herself either. So completely understand that. I think if we just talked about your specific.
She's the mother of my kids, and she's always going to be the mother of my kids. Like, I've got zero interest in going down the Amber Heard kind of thing. This is more what I'm setting the record straight in this book is no, I'm not a woman basher. I hate woman bashers, and what happened was a really, the experience. I mean, what happened through our divorce was probably something I did not. Well, I know I did not expect. I didn't see coming. I probably should have, but I didn't, and it was the worst experience of my life. And I don't wish it upon you know, uh, my worst enemies, those that love to weaponize that personal experience. But again, if you think about it, when you think of a violent, abusive man, it's not some weird story about a chopping board 5 years, 6 years ago. That they have. They have a pattern of behavior where they're abusive, sick, and twisted men, and they belong in jail. The problem is the system's being built in a way because, and I often think that it really was designed to protect vulnerable women. It's just been abused by the majority. And I can confidently say the majority because I sat in years in courts watching it play out and speaking to the lawyers representing these cases. And it's been abused by the majority to protect the minority that often don't actually use the system because they're living in fear.
Mm.
It's a sad saga, but the thing that I'm happy to finally be able to do, because I know I've seen for years, my followers trying to defend me, and I'd watch them, and so either they would turn around and say, "Well, you don't know both sides of the story," and people would go, "Well, he pled guilty to it, so he did it." Well, if I give you that choice, if you don't pick, if I give you your kids or your pride and you choose your pride, that actually makes you a way worse human than anything that you claim about me. But the other one that they say is, they kind of minimize the domestic violence, and I don't think that's helpful. Like, I think domestic violence is horrible, and both ways. And I think that often only men and physical domestic violence is picked up, and it should be called out.
But women can be equally abusive, and women can carry a lot of trauma from past history as well. And I think, I mean, I'm not sure what system you're talking about in Australia, but in New Zealand we have family court, and the system's recently been changed, and it's a mess. It really is guilty until proven innocent, and I don't think that's how a justice system should operate. But yet somehow in family court it is, and what it does mean is that a number of times either parent can be restricted for, like you said, some can be years at a time from access from their children, and it hasn't been done in a legal judicial process. It's just someone says something, and because the court system takes so long, it is what it is. And it's really, really sad how that can play out for people like yourself who are innocent, who haven't actually committed the crime, and therefore you're put in this awful position of, well, what do I do? And then the media, obviously, because in your case you're speaking out a lot about the government, the media will grab that, amplify that, and use it as a reason to silence
the media,
you.
they were in that courtroom. They were begging. I'll tell you now. They asked the judge for photos and any corroborating evidence of the story because they wanted to publish it. Obviously, they wanted the front cover. Look what Yemini did to his ex-wife, and there was nothing. The judge granted it, but there was nothing because nothing actually happened. And that's the point, is that for them it was the perfect thing. Before that point, all they had was calling me. They said that I once called myself a Jewish Nazi in tongue in cheek, making fun of Antifa. I was wearing a kippah on my head. I was mocking him, and they had that until then. And that kind of, because until that point, it was just like, it was kind of funny. Like everywhere I'd go, they'll call me a Nazi, and I would wear the kippah on my head just like to make the visual of it more entertaining. Like, look at these clowns. Then they got this. It was like the jackpot for them, and they were so excited. And the media were in the room, and obviously the media can't themselves, because of Australian law, they can't give the full picture, but they certainly pick, chose how to report it, to specifically pick it. Like even because that was one of the crimes. The actual worst crime that I was convicted, that I pled guilty to, which I actually did, was 3 text messages that I sent to my ex-wife in that 10-year marriage. And they were mean text messages. They weren't very nice. And like, I'm a bit embarrassed by them. But having said that, if I had said those things, like it was, like if I had said those things to her face, it wasn't a crime. It was about using a carriage service to harass. That's what it's called. And I know in Australia, if you check most men, especially men that have been married for 10 years, their text messages over the 10 years, you're going to find a lot worse than what I wrote in normal relationships. It's just kind of, but that was a federal offense that then carried, and the newspaper ran it as, brutal harassment. Brutal harassment was their labeling of me sending 3 text messages that weren't very nice to my ex-wife during our marriage. And that's the kind of nonsense. And it was just a character assassination, and it worked to a degree. It did work.
Yeah.
I thank people that did defend me blindly through those years that I could not talk about it. But I think now it's time, and I guess my message to supporters and people that defend me is thank you, but arm yourself with the truth. Like, literally go get the book, and I articulate it better in there than I'm probably doing here, because I had the time to think about how to formulate it. But also is like, to men that are out there, is that are going through it. I think my message, because I went through it, and at the time it was like so confronting. I couldn't believe, like I told you, there was a day that we don't talk about, and I probably wouldn't be here if I didn't have support. And I guess to men that are going through that and getting the shock of suddenly losing your kids or whatever it is, because you've had a relationship breakdown that you never imagined would go down this road. Trust me, it gets better. It doesn't feel like it in the moment, but it does. And there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's never worth, just fight through. Just do it, and you'll get there. And at the end, unless you are a piece of shit. If you are a piece,
in which case.
But no, if you are a violent scumbag that did actually, hurt your ex. And I don't blame people who like my work, but have till now felt like they can't excuse my behavior from back then, the story that they were fed one side of. I know you started this, like, my ex deserves a platform and she can say what she wants, but she did have a platform, and she did tell the media, she did give the media her full statement, which was just like a whole heap of unsubstantiated stuff. Like it was horrible to hear, but whatever, it was more horrible to read it in print in the newspaper without me being able to comment, because they knew I couldn't comment. They couldn't even give me the chance to comment.